Okay. So massage uses what's called the gate control theory of pain, which is the same as TENS machine. So either the tingles from the TENS machine or the strokes of the massage, the theory is that it floods the brain with so many messages of a nice sensation that the brain doesn't register the stronger, sharper sensations of the tightenings quite as much. And this is the only technique that I've actually developed myself. All the others I've stolen from other people, and I hope that I've credited them well during the videos. So for this one, I use the whole of my forearm on the lower back and sacral area. And the reason I do this is because it covers a really wide area, and that means lots of nerves are going to be touched by this massage, and hopefully it's very comforting. Does it feel nice? It should feel nice. Good. So it's very easy to do, and that's really important as well, because sometimes you can do massage with just a couple of fingers somewhere, which can feel really nice, but it's much harder work on your fingers. And if you think about labour, once it really gets going, it takes an average of 12 hours, and many people have a lot of pre-labour time. If you do something that's more sustainable, you both can keep going for a lot longer on that. So for as long as the easier thing is helping you, then use the easier thing. So, this technique is sacral pressure, and so you use your hands against the sacral area, and you just lean in, and you can lean towards me just to get the pressure that's nice. I'm not using the strength of my arms to do this, I'm just leaning in with my body weight. It might be nicer to have the hands spread out a bit, it might be nicer to have one on top of the other. People like different things, and it can really take the edge off that bit in the middle when the tightening is at its strongest to get this sacral pressure. So just try it in different ways to see which way the way is best for you. I once worked with a doula who held a breadboard up against the sacrum of a woman during every tightening, and that's not to suggest that I would do that but it's just to know that the pressure against the sacrum for some women can be really hard, and that can be quite nice for them. So I learned hip squeezes from Deborah Pascali-Bonaro, who's an amazing doula from America and does fabulous workshops. And she showed me hip squeezes, and to do those you need your hands, wide hands on either side of the hips, and you squeeze. And when you squeeze the pelvis from down below, you're actually helping to open the inlet, so the baby's got more space to go into it. And when you squeeze from higher up, you're maybe not as much as this pelvis, it's a bit more lax than the average pelvis, but you are helping by a good 2.5–3 centimetres to open up the space that the baby's got to come out of. And so it's an amazing thing to have that extra help with the movement. So big wide hands either side, and really good communication to say what's working for you. Earlier on in labour, it's going to feel better to have the hip squeezes lower down, and later on when you're pushing the baby out, higher up's going to be the place where it helps to open that pelvis in the right place. So good communication, and it's a really good technique, but it's quite a hard technique to do. So I'm going to show you some easier ways of applying them as well. So from lower down you'd be helping to open the inlet, and from higher up you'd be helping to open the outlet. And it's really good to do this right in the height of the contraction when it's really at its strongest. It might just take the edge off. And of all the techniques, hip squeezes are the hardest to do. So for as long as something easier like the forearm massage or the sacral pressure is working, or even a more simple thing like holding a hot water bottle on the bit that's got the most sensation there, then use that instead. But hip squeezes are brilliant, especially later on.
You will tell me, or
just have a go at the hip squeezes. So you can squeeze from higher up, and then try lower down, and just find for you the position that helps the best. And the thing with hip squeezes and with all these techniques is that it's really important for women to be able to tell their birth partners exactly how it's nice, if they'd like the technique higher or lower, harder or softer, or if they're really hitting the spot. It's really good for them to get that feedback, because they want to do what's best to make you as comfortable as possible, but they're not psychic and they don't know how it's feeling for you, and they don't know how your baby might have moved and what might be working now that wasn't working later. So really helpful if you can give that feedback. A little bit lower. For people, sometimes people really like hip squeezes and it's quite early on in the labour, and it would be a lot to ask a birth partner to do that pressure on the hips throughout 5 days of a latent phase before the active phase of labour starts. So if for some women that hip squeeze is a thing that's working for them, one way that you can do it more easily is to have her stand against the wall and just lean against her hips. So you do the same hip squeeze, but it's a lot less effort. You can keep this up for days. It's very easy to do it, and it depends. If you're very different in heights, it doesn't work so well. But if you're quite similar heights, then you can just get that squash in the right place and hold it during the tightening. So hip squeezes can be applied with the woman lying down in bed, which is very useful in the latent phase when the labour is just building up, and it's really important to get as much rest as possible to not enter the active stage of labour exhausted. So one way of keeping comfortable is to, when you're in your nest, you've built a nest using every pillow and cushion in the house. You've definitely got one under your head. You might have a little one under your bump, one between your knees, one between your ankles. Get as comfy as you can, and when tightening comes along, the birth partner can then apply the hip squeeze very easily until the tightening's gone away, and then you both get back to sleep and have a good rest before the next one comes along. And similarly, you can apply sacral pressure in the bed as well, so you can just hold the hand against the sacrum. If that's the thing that's working for you, then you can do that in bed as well, and then get both back in bed, having the most amount of sleep that you can get, or at least rest in between the tightenings until the next one comes along. So I know for most people watching this, planning a normal birth, are unlikely to think about epidurals. But for some people who plan that kind of birth, or for some people that choose to have an epidural, you know, you can end up with an epidural. And if you're really aware of active birth and how important it is to be upright and moving around, to help the baby do those twists and turns through the pelvis, you might feel really worried about what's going to happen with an epidural, because one of the problems with epidurals, one of the disadvantages, is that because there's not that movement going on, the baby has a tendency to not get into the best position, and also the woman can't go with her body's urges to push the baby out, and the baby might get into a less than ideal position, and so there's a higher chance of the doctor needing to help take the baby out with forceps or ventouse, and quite often there's an episiotomy or a cut to the perineum that goes with that, which is all good stuff to avoid if you can. But one small tip you can do to keep active even when there is an epidural on board, once it's got working and you've got the block really nicely making you numb from the waist down, then you need to change positions, and this is a good position to get into. And once you're there, the people that are with you can just help you a little bit, just by doing some gentle rocking, so that you're keeping that pelvis with a bit of movement going, even though you're not doing that movement yourself. So obviously you do it on one side for a little while, and then you can turn over and do it on the other side as well. So just a really good tip. And as well as that, you can apply sacral pressure and hip squeezes just to vary that shape of that pelvis a little bit as you go along. Oxytocin is the hormone that makes labour work. So it's behind the uterus contracting down on that baby. We also release oxytocin when we're happy and comfortable, when we relax in our own homes. And that's why we encourage people to be at home for as long as possible in labour. And if you're worried or scared or anxious, then you release adrenaline. And adrenaline is that fight or flight hormone, and it inhibits the oxytocin. So we need to do whatever we can to encourage oxytocin and discourage adrenaline. So I really wouldn't advise anybody to watch horror films, for example, in the latent phase. Things that you can do to encourage oxytocin flowing is have the lights dim, have the voices soft, have the woman feel as comfortable as she can, and not having people around you that are going to make you feel criticised or watched or just in any way uncomfortable is really important. So the people who are with you in birth will encourage that oxytocin or discourage it depending on who they are. Really important to think about who they are. And to think about as well that nipple and clitoral stimulation also help with oxytocin flowing, but only if you're enjoying it. If it's getting on your nerves, it's not going to work. And also to think about hugging. Kirsten Avnes-Moberg does a lot of work on oxytocin, and she says that a hug has to have good skin-to-skin contact and last for at least 20 seconds to work, to get that oxytocin flowing. So a good thing to know if you're having one of those situations in your labour where things are slowing down and you're thinking about what can you do to get it flowing again, then maybe some hugging or some good slow dancing might really help you get things going again.